Hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at conditionals in Python. Conditionals are a very, very powerful tool because they're going to give us the ability to actually make decisions to basically make our code a little bit more reusable, a little more scalable, a little bit more flexible. Now, and generally, conditionals are pretty straightforward to use in Python. And if you remember way back when we were talking a little about Boolean operators, you want to make sure yourself is pretty familiar with those before we get too carried away with these, because things will get a little messy once the compound conditionals start to make their way in. This video is going to be concentrating kind of on the basic syntax of it. Later on, of course, we'll be taking a look at something called ranges. That's something I don't want to get into in this video. Then, of course, we'll be looking at switch case, which is a fantastic tool, and it makes your life much simpler in Python. So let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and create myself a couple variables. I'll create a variable called number. Of course, you know what it's going to pick. I'll create one called word. Let's see here. We got to be not too ironic. We'll keep it easier. We'll call it color this time. We'll call it red because science. And of course, we'll go ahead and do bool, and we'll say that it's going to be, oh, we can't do that. That's dangerous. Bool value. Let's be a little safer, and we'll call this false. Fantastic. So we have ourselves three different values here. We have a number, which is an integer, 64. We have color, which is a string, red. And of course, we have a bool value, which is set to false. So that's going to be a good old-fashioned 0 there. So let's go ahead and ask some questions about these particular elements. So to make an if statement in Python, we're simply going to type in if. And then we're going to go ahead and describe what we are checking. Like I said, it keeps it relatively simple for us. Like, for example, if we wanted to say, is number double equals 64? We're simply saying, is the value of number, which is our variable here, equals, remember, if you do 2 equals, you're asking, single equals means you're telling, 64, which is a number. And at the end here, you'll notice it's kind of grumpy, and it's expecting something of us, and it's going to be expecting a colon. So I'm going to go ahead and add a colon there and press enter. Now, if you remember from when we looked at functions, you probably recall that when we do this, it needs to be indented. If you don't indent it, it's not going to know that stuff underneath here belongs to this if statement. So print, for example, I'm thinking if I were to go to the next line, you'll notice that it's still part of the statement. It is equal to. So now the cool thing here, it helps if you spell the word thinking correctly. That definitely would be helpful. I'll press enter here. One of the things you'll notice now is if my number equals 64, it will first print I'm thinking, then it will print it is equal to. So now if I press the run button, you will see I'm thinking it is equal to. Now, one quick little warning before we get too carried away with these if statements. What if I accidentally did that? Well, it still technically belongs to it, right? Can't do that. That unexpected indent will not be recognized. When you start really going hard on if statements, people get, you have to be so careful that you don't accidentally make that mistake. Another common mistake people do is they go like this. You saw me hit the space bar a bunch of times. Depending on your IDE, you may not be able to get away with that. You might actually have to press the tab key on your keyboard in order to make it go. One really fun thing that you can do too, which I think is kind of handy there. So if you press shift tab, it goes left. If you press tab, it goes to the right. So if you're really stuck and did something like this by accident, you can always just select it and press tab to push it back where it needs to go. Fantastic. So let's go ahead and give ourselves a couple lines here and create ourselves another if statement. If color does not equal blue. So go ahead and keep it nice and simple here. It is not blue. Let's see if that works. Go ahead and run it. And you will see here, I'm thinking it is equal to, it is not blue. That checks out because my question here is the color variable, which is a string, remember, not equal to blue? Now you can see that that works pretty well. Now I know you're sitting here going, oh, that's not too bad. I can kind of get the hang of these if statements. That's pretty groovy. I like that. Oh, what if you did this? Oh, what happens if we do that? You will notice here that it is smart enough to know that even though you're dealing with a string and an integer, it will not have a heart attack here, which actually works really well for us because it doesn't explode because we accidentally stuck in that polymorphism and that soft typing that Python is so well known for. So that works actually pretty well. So go ahead and switch this back to blue just for kind of similarities. So one of the cool things with Python is that when we deal with Boolean values, we can actually cheat a little bit and do a little bit of shorthand. So if you remember, my bool value here, my variable, is set to the value of false. If I say if bool value equals false, print it is false. So now if I were to run this code real quickly here, you'll notice it will say it is false. That makes perfect sense because my bool value is equal to false. That checks. Of course, if we come in here and do exclamation point equals, saying not equal to false, if we run it, we get no code here because it does not execute that code. Now, there's a really, really fun little shorthand trick inside of Python to make this statement a little bit easier, which is a kind of a cool trick here. So one of the things I can do is I can say if bool value. What you're saying here is you're saying is true. So now if I print, it is true. Now the cool thing here is if I were to run this code, you'll notice that nothing appears down here because bool value is not true. Bool value is false. Now you're probably sitting here going, well, that doesn't really help me because I wanted to see if it was false. I didn't want to see if it is true. Is there a way to get around this? Well, if you remember ages ago, we saw this thing called not, and not inverts bool values. So if I actually were to come in here and type in not, I am simply saying, is this statement true? Well, let's logically think about it for a second. Bool value is false. Not false is true, therefore true. So you can actually see this is a great little way to actually check values to make sure that they're working the way that we want them to do. And this is a nice little kind of shorthand value of this. Again, these two lines of code are equivalent to each other. Above and below are equivalent. Of course, it's confusing you to death because of this. Notice it is not true, so it's false. Double negatives are awesome. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to expand upon the functionality of our little if statements a little bit. What if we want to ask two questions at once? Well, there's a lot of ways to ask two questions at once. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you one way to ask two questions at once. Let's say I want to say if, what do we say, number equals 64, print part 1 correct. If color equals red, again, keeping it simple today. I did it again. Print part 2 is correct. Now, the interesting thing here is my if statement is now part of this if statement. It will only execute if this if statement is enabled. That's an important point here. You also notice that this tab here is tabbed in from the original tab. You start to see how this starts getting messy. So if I press that run button here, you'll notice I get two commands. Part 1 is correct, part 2 is correct. Now, if I were to, for example, change this to 63 and run my code one more time, what you'll observe is this whole block of code doesn't execute. It doesn't even check to see if part 2 is correct because part 1 never got to that particular point. Now, I know you're liking this. You're like, oh, that's pretty good. Is there a way that I could mix this into a single if statement rather than now making this so darn messy? The answer is yeah, you absolutely can. I can also use an and. Remember back with Boolean operators, we looked at ands and ors? It works. So if I say if number equals 64 and color equals red, print the two parts are correct. Again, this is just an example. Now, if I run my code again, you'll notice it says the two parts are correct. The reason it's working is because both of those elements are correct. Now, you're probably sitting here saying, this is not equivalent to this, and you are 100% correct. These are not equivalent statements. They would be equivalent statements if I grabbed this and I shoved this in here and deleted this. That's an important point, that they're not the same. If I put everything here, they would be the same. If by splitting them, I've actually created two separate logical kind of problems here, depending on what it exactly is we're trying to generate here. And that's just one of the handy little things that we have at our disposal when it comes to if statements. Now, you're probably sitting here going, this is pretty cool, but what if I wanted to determine what number it isn't? Now, if I sat here saying if number is 1, if number is 2, if number is 3, if number is 4, we could have a lot of if statements, and that would get really, really painful really, really, really fast. Now, very, very sick people who know a lot about ranges will already set the range up and go. But there's a better way to do it, and that is with the else statement. So I'm going to come down here, else statements. Go ahead and make this nice and clear so everybody can go ahead and see it. Now, if else statements work by checking the first thing first and then executing it if it's true. Otherwise, it will execute the second component. So for example, let's say if number is 64. Print, yes, it is. So I'm going to press enter. Now, this is where a lot of people get themselves in trouble. I'm going to press backspace, type in else, print, no, it isn't. Now, the cool thing here is if this number value, which we checked already, is 64, it will execute this code. If it is not a true statement here, it will go ahead and execute this code instead. Let's give it a run, and you will see, yes, it is. That makes perfect sense, because remember, our number is a value of 64, and since it is true, it is going to execute the top branch. Let's go ahead and make it 62. Now, our number is not equal to 62, so that means it won't execute this. Instead, it'll fire this else statement. Now, if I press run, you will see it says, no, it isn't. That makes perfect sense here. Now, you're sitting here going, could you get a little more complicated with this? Yeah, you could. You can end up with something that looks a little bit like this. If a number equals 62, yes, it is. If number does not equal 62, no, it isn't. We could get a little more sophisticated and say greater than or equal to, but we're not going to do that today. So you can see if I run this, it's going to work exactly the same way. But of course, it's a lot messier. And as your code gets progressively more complicated, this is not going to work well for you, which is why you have to be very careful with else statements. So let's go ahead and give ourselves a little bit of room here. Again, I'll sneak down and make a big old mess with all my if statements. Let's say we wanted to go ahead and create an if statement that has an if else in it. Let's say if number is 62 or 64, we can come in here and make another one. If color equals, I'll use a weird color today. It's not a weird color. Print the number is 64 and the color is cyan. Aha, see what I did there? Else print the number is 64 and the color is not cyan. Nice, nice, nice. But watch this. Else print the color is something, but the number isn't 64. You can see here that I'm allowed to have a separate if-else statement inside of a separate if-else statement. So now if I were to run my code up at the top here, which you'll notice here, the number is 64 and the color is not cyan. Whoopsies. Now if I change this to 62, this is why you have to debug your code carefully, you will notice the color is something, but the number isn't 64. So your brain is going, oh, that doesn't work, because then you'd have to copy paste this down into here and it'd get messy. That's gross. There's got to be a better way to do this. There's got to be something we can do. And there are ways to get around this. This is a good case of a match case, switch case. But again, we'll look at that a little later on. So as you can see, the if and the if else is a fantastic way to control the flow of your code. It's also a great way to do some error checking. It's a great way, we've seen it in some other programs, to do some enhanced operations depending on what it is you're trying to achieve in your code. Don't be surprised if you have about 1 million of these things. Now, one thing I will say is an if statement is expensive computationally because of the way that it processes your numbers. The other thing you have to be careful is you don't accidentally compare apples and oranges, sort of a thing like that. Paper and scissors, for example, is a classic one. People think that's greater or less than, and it just gets really, really messy really fast. Now, one of the nice things is Python also gives us the ability to go ahead and determine ranges of things, which is actually like quite a bit here. So let's go ahead and grab my color variable again, and I'm just going to overwrite it here back to the color. We'll do green. I'm just making careful. So what I want to do is I want to make an if statement to determine if my color is one of the 3 additive colors. Now, my 3 additive colors are red, green, and blue. So let's see if we can figure this puzzle out. All right, so I'm going to start with my if. It's going to be color. I'm going to say if color is green, or color is blue, or color is red, print that color is a primary additive color. I like that. Else, we're going to come in here and say the color is not a primary additive color. Probably spelled additive wrong, but you'll have to forgive me for that. So let's go ahead and run the code here, and we can see here the color is a primary additive color. That's pretty good. But one of the things you probably notice here is this statement is getting a little on the long side. One of the fun things with Python is we generally want to make something easy to read. When you get one of these that becomes 1.5 miles long, it's like way out to here, maybe it goes on to a second line, that should be the red flag in your brain that we're making things harder than we really, really need to. Now, pros will immediately say, we can just create a list of colors and see if it's in the list. That's actually pretty expensive, but yes, we could definitely do that. Again, depends on how many items are in the list, but we'll deal with that another day. Instead, Python gives us an extra tool called elif. E-L-I-F. Elif, I think, is when you actually ask it to do. In elif, it'll ask you to actually, if the first thing is not true, it simply asks another question and determines whether or not that's true, and so on and so forth. So taking a look at our example up here, let's try that. So I'm going to go ahead and say if color is green. Again, keep it simple. I'll go ahead and say a print. We'll go old school here. We'll actually use an F string here. Additive color. Look at that. Ooh, that's fancy. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my next line, press backspace, and I'm going to ask it a new question if the first question was not true. So I'm going to type in elif. This is simply saying else if. If this one's not true, ask this one instead. So I'll say if color is blue, because science. Now again, look at this. Of course, you see me copy paste code. Whenever you copy paste code, that means you boo-booed, but that's again something I'll deal with another time. Now here's where things get very interesting. There's two different paths I can go down, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on. One of the things I could do here is I could actually add another elif here, and I could say elif color is red, and then of course I could print a garden. We could steal that code we did before. Now that's okay, but watch this. I'm actually going to delete this and intentionally make a problem. I'm going to type in else printf color is not a primary additive color. Do you see the problem? Well, let's create the problem. So I'm going to come up here and change my color to red. Watch this. Uh-oh, something broke. You can see that my else statement triggered perfectly. As a matter of fact, if I came in here and do hot pink, great color, press that one. Hot pink is not a primary additive color. Of course it's not, because we didn't check. So let's go back to red real fast. Now I need to add myself another elif. Now this is one of the cool things about elif here is we can add as many as we want. So I'm going to come in here and type in elif color equals red. Aha! Control C that sucker, paste that sucker in. Control V, and now we've actually gone ahead and made it so that it checks for my red, green, and blue. And if none of these are true, it will trigger this one. Now, if I want to have a little bit of fun here, let's go ahead and test it real quick. Red is a primary color. If I press my green thing here, you will see red is a primary color, and it actually checked for that. It checked for green, checked for blue, checked for red. Red was true. We're done. Now, if I came in here, of course, did red, space, and ran it, it will say red, space is not a primary additive color. We haven't done a lot of work with strings yet, but strings can get a little messy. But again, that will be for another day for us to actually kind of do a deep dive as to kind of how these problems kind of come up. But you can see how this statement is structurally a little bit different. Now, looking at these two side by side, your brain, of course, is sitting here going, I think this is actually messier than this. You know, this is pretty clear. I get what you're doing here. This is pretty nice. This is getting a little bit messy. And again, it's all going to come down to how many of these you're going to have. And we'll see some syntax later on in order to shrink these down even more to make this even easier. But for today, I'm going to kind of keep it out. So one of the things you have to remember whenever you're doing if statements, when you start doing them, is you have to be extremely careful with your spaces. And a lot of times when people do things with spaces, you'll accidentally have this, which does no damage. It'll yell at you to say, are you sure you didn't want that? But once you start adding ifs to ifs to ifs to ifs to ifs to ifs to ifs, it gets really messy. So let's go ahead and create a common example where these things get really messy. Def is primary. I'm going to make a function that determines if a color is a primary color. So I'm going to go ahead and borrow my code real quickly here. I'm just going to paste it. Again, whenever you copy paste, it's dangerous. And what I'm going to do here is I'm simply going to come here and I'll change this to return true. We'll make it nice and easy here. I'll return true, grab this one, get that out of there. Return true, and I'll go ahead and make this one a return false. Yes, it would be much easier to do that. But one of the things you'll need to do here, and what you're probably going to notice, is it's starting to get a little messy with all these tabs. So I'm actually going to go even have some more fun here. I'll say if color equals magenta, print your eyes are playing tricks on you. So in this case, I've actually built in my own little if statement there. Else we'll print f. Again, we're going to be as messy as possible here, for example. Isn't a color primary? Also, I'm returning false because reasons. Nice. I like that. Ooh, helps if you kind of put your little apostrophe there. Cool. So you can see here that my little spacing is starting to get a little nasty. Now, if I had 700 lines of this, which I routinely have on some of these files, this would start getting really, really, really scary as I start down it. But if we wanted to just test it to make sure it works here, I can say print is primary. Let's have some fun here. We'll type in red. If we were to run this code, it should say true, which is correct. And if we came in here and we're silly and we did blah, 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 blah as a color, that's a hot pink. That's a blue, by the way. It says false. As is not primary, I'm also returning false because reasons. And of course, if I want to come in here magenta and press run again, you will see your eyes are playing tricks on you, false, because it actually works. The whole point of this down here was just to demonstrate how careful you have to be with these spaces as things start getting progressively more complex. Once we start doing things with classes, you're going to be out to here on tabs and go, oh my gosh, what have I done? Enjoy.